You'll recall from our previous lecture on South America that we said that the initial exploration and settlement of South America by the Spanish and the Portuguese concentrated on extractive industries. For the Spanish, the extraction of silver, and for the Portuguese, cane sugar. And that this approach, this extractive approach, marked Latin American history down to the present time. We also said that there were two competing explanations for this phenomenon. The first was an environmental explanation, which posits that the tropical climate of central and the northern half of South America is unsuitable for European settlement and agriculture, and as a consequence did not give rise to the type of entrepreneurship and productive enterprises that one sees in North America. The second explanation is a social and cultural explanation, which posits that the particular social structure of the Iberian Peninsula of Spanish and Portuguese societies favored a landed aristocracy and clerical class that was used to pursuing what is sometimes been called a rentier economy, which is the dependence on rents and other forms of extraction from labor rather than an entrepreneurial and commercial approach. And that these are sort of competing explanations for why Latin America relied on these extractive industries and failed to develop a more entrepreneurial and productive economy. This week, turning to North America and to the question of the coming of the American Civil War, we're going to make an argument in favor of environment or physical geography as the determinative factor. This argument goes something like this, that in both North and South states of the United States, the settlement and development of society was similar. That is to say, initially the immigrants to what became the 13 colonies and eventually the United States came in the 17th and 18th century overwhelmingly from Northern European stock, English, Welsh, Scotch-Irish, and German. And that once that population had been established by the middle of the 18th century, the natural increase of that population accounted for most of the population of both northern and southern United States. So as we can see, for example, in the founding fathers of the United States, it was their similar cultural and social background that enabled them to collaborate in the formation of a single nation. By contrast to that, the different physical geographies of the North and South is the determining factor that explains the rise of different economies and therefore different political orientations that eventually led to the American Civil War. To understand this argument, we begin by looking at the physical geography of North America. First of all, the topography. As this map shows, the topography of North America, and particularly the United States, is formed by large mountain ranges in the west and the east, separated by a broad alluvial or central plain. In the west, this is known as the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas, these young, very high, rugged mountains that were formed by the collision between the North American plate and the Pacific plate, as explained in our lecture on plate tectonics. In the east, the much older, more eroded Appalachian Mountains long precede the breakup of Pangaea by several 100 million years, and in fact are associated with a pre-Pangaea breakup that includes the Atlas Mountains of what is now Morocco and northern Africa. The drainage off of these two eastern and western mountain ranges forms the central Mississippi River system and the alluvial plain that stretches from the western edge of the Appalachians all the way to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The second feature of this physical geography is climate, temperature, and rainfall. And as this map shows, the bulk of the United States and all of continental United States lies between 30 degrees and 50 degrees north latitude. You recall that along 30 degrees north latitude we have a prevailing high pressure zone, the so-called subtropical high, which produces a persistent dry climate as is seen in Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. Whereas north of the 30th parallel, stretching all the way to the 60th parallel, 60 degrees north latitude, we have, as explained in the lecture on atmospheric physics, a prevailing westerly, global westerly wind pattern. That is to say, the winds come from the west or from the Pacific Ocean and proceed from west to east across the continent of North America, and in particular the United States. The interaction between that atmospheric pattern and the topography mentioned earlier produces a discrete rainfall pattern across the United States. As this topographical map shows, the air loaded with with moisture that has been evaporated off the Pacific Ocean hits the west coast of the United States, rises, cools, the moisture in it condenses, and falls as relatively heavy rainfall along the west coast of the United States, in particular the Northwest, or what is now the states of Washington and Oregon. As that air mass passes over the Sierra Nevadas and the Rockies, the air rises even higher, gets colder, more moisture condenses and falls as rain and snow on the Rocky Mountains. Passing over the mountains, however, most of the moisture has been wrung dry out of the air, and we get what is called a rain shadow over the central part of the continent, forming the Great Plains. Finally, as that air mass reaches the Mississippi River, the Great Lakes, and the water systems of that drainage basin, the air is recharged with moisture, so once again we get rainfall over the eastern half of the United States. So this map of precipitation in the United States demonstrates this profile. Note the very distinct division between the eastern and western half of the country, with the east being much wetter and the west being much drier. Note also that the very heavy rainfall on the northwest coast and the extremely dry climate in the southwest along California, Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. By contrast, in the eastern half of the United States, we get a temperate and moist zone in the northeast quadrant of the country and a wet and warmer zone in the southeast quadrant of the country. These slides illustrate this rainfall and temperature pattern, seen here first in Seattle, where you get a very persistent, misty, wet climate, and then passing over the Rocky Mountains into the Central Plain, as indicated here in this slide of Nebraska, a treeless grassland that extends across the center of the country, and then moving up into in New England in the northeast, a moist, temperate climate that produces a deciduous and mixed forests, then swinging down to the south, as pictured here in Savannah, Georgia, a warmer, wetter climate, and then finally swinging all the way to the southwest, an extremely dry desert. In the next part of this lecture, we will look at the implications of this physical geography for the distribution of agriculture and human settlement in the United States.